Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I want to go over an article entitled 12 Racist Expressions That Brazilians Need to Remove from the Vocabulary. And the reason why I wanted to discuss this is that oftentimes there are phrases or terms or sayings that we have, and we use them every day, and we don't really think about what the origins of these terms or phrases or sayings might be. They just become, part of the everyday culture, the everyday language. And you find these type of phrases, terms, and sayings in the English spoken in the United States as well as the Portuguese spoken in Brazil. But oftentimes people don't think twice about where these terms, sayings, or words come from. Now, I bring this up now because of the fact that I know that even just featuring these 12 that come out of the everyday Brazilian conversation, it made me think about some expressions that we have in American English that we use every day and nobody gives a second thought to it. One particular word that comes to mind, I remember when I was living in Sao Paulo, and when I was, when I would give classes in Sao Paulo in English, the better part of the class beyond the actual English class was just the exchange of culture. The students would often ask me just about, cultural things in the United States. Why do Americans do this? What does this mean? Where does this come from? And I appreciated the exchange. Like I said, it was probably more important to me because I like to interact with people every day. And I tell you, I learned a lot about just for years. I studied, just read books, magazine articles, online articles about Brazil. But I think I got more out of living there than anything that I could read just by everyday interactions with just everyday Brazilians, right? So I remember one particular class we were having, and after many of my classes, people would ask me because I would go into all types of topics. And it got to the point where some of my students were just like, teacher, let's get the English class done so we can get into the real good stuff. It would be a 2 hour class, and I would try to get through the English in about an hour and a half so we could spend a half an hour just exchanging information. They would tell me things about, Brazil that I may not know because obviously I wasn't Brazilian, but I was picking up on these things just living and interacting with people. And then I could share with them things out of the United States that they probably weren't aware of. So I remember, the word, for example, picnic is a term that has been a lot of terms that you get out of English because the United States is such a dominant economic political power. A lot of the terms that we say in American English, sometimes these words are coming to the Brazilian everyday speech conversation, and they won't even translate the word. They'll just use the word that they're familiar with. They've heard the word so much because they consume so much American culture, movies and television shows and this type of thing. And oftentimes they'll just take the word and it becomes part of everyday, conversation in Brazil, and they won't even translate the word. So sometimes I'm confused as to when a term becomes popular, if the Brazilians are going to take the word and Brazilianize it, replace it with the Portuguese translation, or just use the English term as it is and just pronounce it the way that they do. There's oftentimes when you're having conversations with a Brazilian or, a group of Brazilians, and you'll hear them say words that you don't even recognize because they have Brazilianized the word. The term might be actually a term in English, but because they say it in the way that they say it, it's like you listen to it 100 times and you're like, what are you saying? How we say download and a Brazilian will say download. There's hundreds of examples of that. Particularly when you get into maybe business or technology, a lot of terms will just instead of having a Portuguese translation, they'll actually just use the English word, and you you just have to listen to how they say it and try to get used to how they're saying it. And anybody who's interacted with Brazilians know how they'll take. I mean, it's the same thing with me. You know, I'm speaking Portuguese there. Obviously, I had an accent, um, and they would just get accustomed to how I would speak. You know, just the very fact that I was speaking Portuguese. Brazilians like that when you have taken time to at least learn some of their language, because English is the dominant language all over the world. Everybody's expected to speak English. But anyway, getting back to this example, one day the term picnic came up while I was teaching this English class. And, picnic is another one of those terms that Brazilians have adapted into their own language. And as far as I knew, because of the dominance of American media in Brazil, films, television shows, uh, people picked up on the term picnic. And as with a lot of other terms that people will emulate when it comes out of the English speaking world, they picked up on picnic and they Brazilianized it. So the English picnic became piquenique in Portuguese. So after they asked me, I don't even remember how it came up. I don't know if they asked me or if I brought it up or it was something that came up while we were just having a discussion. And it led me down the road of talking about the origins, as far as I knew, of the term picnic. So everybody knows what comes to mind when you think of the term picnic. You think of people who go to a park, they lay out a blanket or a bedspread or something on the grass in the park, and they have a basket with sandwiches and crackers or potato chips or whatever it might be, and that's supposed to be a picnic. But then later, I want to say maybe 20, 25 years ago, I don't know where I heard this from. I don't know if I read it somewhere or somebody said this in a class. I can't remember exactly where I heard this from, but I came to the understanding that picnic came out of the words pick a nick or pick a nig or pick a ninja, if you will, pick an N word. And the story went that this is what racist white folks would do when they were having a public lynching of a black person. They would call all of their friends, their family. It would be like hundreds of white people standing out, watching the scene of a black person being, lynched, being hung up, being hung. And you saw all of these crazy postcards of people, taking pictures and cheesing in the camera while this dead black body is dangling, in the background. And that's what, I came to understand that this is what picnic actually meant. It meant pick a ninja. I'm like, wow. So, this is another one of those things. I thought, okay, this is something that got buried in the American past. And because we use it every day, we the original meaning of the term gets lost over the years. And so this is something that I thought for the last 20 to 25 years. But then I actually went online and I don't know what I was looking for, but I came across this where it was basically showing like, no, that's a myth. We can't find anything that substantiates the idea that the term picnic comes out of pick a nick, pick a nig, pick an N word or whatever. So I was intrigued by that because, a lot of times you go online and you hear something or you read about something or somebody tells you something, you go online to find out if it's true or not. And you'll have these whole, it's almost like an industry now of these debunking sites that are out there that says, no, that's not true. If any hot political topic that might come up, as soon as the rumor spreads, you're going to have a debunker online saying it's not true. Now, then you have people come along and say we have to debunk the debunkers because who's behind these people who are debunking the story that came out? Who's paying them? So it's like you follow the money trail and you find the people who are trying to hide the truth from the population will hire these debunkers to mislead people and dismiss this new information that they got from the first place. Anyway, that's how that's it's really funny if you ever follow that. But let me keep going where I'm going with this. I ended up going online to find out just how true this was, and this is what I came across. So this is if you go to the Ferris State University website, ferris.edu, you can find some gems and just the history of race, history of African Americans in the United States. And this one's called Blacks, Picnics, and Lynchings, January 2004. And you scroll down, somebody's asking this question if there's a connection between the word picnic, as we know, having lunch in a park, versus picnic, pick a ninja, if you will. And they basically debunked it. It responded to the question. It says that picnic was originally a 17th century French word. And look at how it's spelled here. This is going to be important, right? It says, now, if it's pronounced in French, and I haven't spoken French, I haven't had a French class in years, so I'm not really sure. It could be pique nique. That's important. I'm going to get into why. But it says its meaning was similar to today's meaning, a social gathering where each attendee brings a share of the food. The French piquer may have referred to a leisurely style of eating, pick at your food, or it may simply have meant pick. It goes on to say that the term picnic does not appear in the English language until around 1800. So that was intriguing because I'm in Brazil, a Portuguese speaking country. And I'm under the assumption, because everything comes to Brazil mostly out of the United States culturally, if something is it becomes popular in the United States, it's not going to be long before, it catches on in Brazil. So automatically believe that, okay, they took the English word picnic and then made it the Brazilian Portuguese piquenique. But then this is what's fascinating about learning the languages, because, you got French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian are all part of these Romance languages. And even if you don't speak all four of those, if you speak just one of them, you can kind of, if you were to try to read something in another language, you can kind of pick up on what it's saying, even if you don't speak that language, because of the similar root, right? So I'm thinking that the Brazilians copied the Americans, but when in actuality, what happened is that it seems that the Americans copied the French word. So it went from, looks like pique nique, it becomes picnic in English from the French. And so in actuality, in going from French to English to Portuguese, it started off in a Romance language and it ends up in a Germanic language or whatever. And then it ends up in another Romance language. So in actuality, the Brazilian speakers of Portuguese took it back to almost the original phrasing of the word in French. Because again, Brazilians pronounce the term as piquenique. And this is, if you look at it, look at the word, you can see out of the French, that's kind of what it looks like. So, I've taken classes in Spanish and French. I learned Portuguese on my own, but this is always fascinating to me when you find, they say that the English language is like a bastard language because it takes pieces from so many different languages, right? So I'm thinking it came out of the American English when actually the American English copied it from the French. And then making that circle, going all the way around, the Portuguese speakers pick up on it. That was just fascinating to me. It went from the French to the English to the Portuguese, just to go back to how the original French at least looked in spelling it. So apparently the idea that this is connected, it looks like that's not necessarily so. So then you have a term like cotton picking. And when you watch American cartoons, you come across a lot of little sneaky racial stuff in there that as a kid, you might not notice what's going on. I remember in Spike Lee's, I think it was 1999 film Bamboozled, and he showed a lot of these cartoons, and you look at them differently when you understand what's going on there. Some of those old cartoons where they'll have a black mammy in the kitchen, it should be singing like slave songs or something, Negro spiritual. She might have them singing, have them singing that way. And just the way some of those people were looking, you have these characters eating watermelons or whatever. And you come to find out years later, like, wow, this is like, it's got racist overtones. So, anybody who watched some American cartoons, you come across the term cotton picking. But you hear it so much the same way that I'm getting into the Brazilian racist expressions, you don't associate it with anything racist. So I remember it must have been about 2007 or 8, 9, somewhere in there. And I was watching CNN. Mind you, I don't watch CNN anymore. We know what CNN is all about. I had to get off the CNN train. And they had a conservative host on there at the time named Lou Dobbs. And I remember he was talking about, it might have been somebody like Condoleezza Rice from yeah, I think she was a Secretary of State under the George W. Bush administration, and he was saying something about her where he went into this cotton picking. He cut himself off before he finished the term, but the next day, it became a big story because Lou Dobbs said cotton picking, is known to be a racist expression. And up at that point, I have to admit, I didn't even know that it was a racist expression. And as I said, it was because it was so much a part of the American vernacular that I didn't even know the origins. But then you think about it, it's like, okay, if he's talking about cotton picking, what people in the United States are most associated with picking cotton? That would be Black Americans. So I learned at that point, like, oh, cotton picking it has a racist connotation to it. And that's why it became a big story. Then you have a term like uppity, and uppity defines a Black person who is maybe ascending in life, someone who is they expect to get treatment that's different from other Black people. They are going beyond the quote unquote place that America has reserved for Black Americans. It's like, certain places, associations, like you don't belong here, go back with your people, stop trying to get out of your place, Negro. So uppity it kind of defines a Black person who is trying to get into areas of American life where people think he doesn't belong. That's what uppity is supposed to mean. Then you have another term like the word kinky. So we know that nowadays when somebody hears the term kinky, they're generally thinking of some abnormal or different, out of the ordinary sex act. Rick James and Super Freak, he says she's a very kinky girl, right? So I come to understand that the term kinky, as we see it now, as being beyond the ordinary type of sexual relations. The same way that I came across the supposed origin of picnic. This is what I learned about kinky, where it says that, well, back in the days of American slavery, the type of sexual relations that the white slave master would have with his black slave, he would do things with his black slave, his property, that he probably wouldn't do with his white wife. It's like you keep the white woman on the pedestal. So then if you want to experience with the what you call the freaky, the abnormal, the exotic, the fetish, then that's the kind of sex you have with a Black woman. And seeing that a Black woman has kinky hair, they call it kinky sex. Now, that's my understanding. But again, coming across and coming to learn that picnic does not necessarily come out of pick a nick, as in lynching. I can't substantiate the idea that kinky, that's where kinky comes from. This is what a lot of people believe in the streets, but this is another thing, I don't want to really pass on any false information. So I can't say that I can substantiate what people believe to be the origin of this term when it's used in American English in terms of, sexual relations. But this is something that I had long heard. So then these are just four examples of how we have racist expressions. There's probably plenty more. Those are the four that pop in my mind now. And they have racist origins, but same thing happens in Brazil. So this is what I wanted to talk about today. Again, 12 racist expressions that Brazilians need to remove from their vocabulary. So let's get into this.